Buddy.
Good morning.
Good morning, and welcome to the Auditor General Committee. I call this Auditor General Committee meeting of Thursday, February 22nd, 2024 to order. This committee meeting is being convened by electronic means as authorized under Part 14 of the Procedure Bylaw. As such, committee members may participate in person or by electronic means. Do we have folks online? If any committee member loses connection during the voting, well, we don't have any voting members online, so I can skip. Oh, sorry, I see Archie, yeah. So if any committee members lose connection during the voting process, we have staff on hand to facilitate getting you back online quickly while we suspend the voting process. Contact information has been circulated to you. Members of the public can view the proceedings via live stream and YouTube link, which will be posted on X at Van City Clerk. Video of committee members speaking, presentations, amendments, and vote results will be projected to viewers when available. Committee members are reminded to please enable their video to ensure quorum is maintained during the meeting under Section 14.13 of the Procedure Bylaw if attending virtually. The external members of the committee can access the speaking queue by clicking the raise hand icon on WebEx or by raising your hand. In the event of an emergency, if we need to evacuate this building, I'd like to direct your attention to the exits. There are 2 exits beyond the glass doors and to the left. If the glass doors are obstructed, please direct your attention to the 4 exits in the chamber. Please use the stairs, do not use the elevator. I'd also like to highlight that we have a defibrillator located at the end of the hallway outside the council chamber. We acknowledge that we are here on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and we thank them for having cared for this land, and we look forward to working with them in partnership as we continue to build this great city together. I also want to take a moment to thank and recognize the immense contributions of the City of Vancouver staff, who work hard every day to help make our city an incredible place to live, work, and play. Clerk, may I have the roll call, please?
Yes, Councillor Kirby-Young is absent. Councillor Dominato, I believe she's here, but she's absent right at the moment. Councillor Fry is in the chair. Councillor Boyle. Councillor Montague. Councillor Joe. Archie Johnson, external representative, present. And Sophia Sui, present. And Carol Bellringer has indicated she is en route. The meeting has quorum, Chair Fry.
Great. Thank you, Clerk. Before we begin, I have a couple of announcements. Any comments on the agenda item can be sent to the committee using the web form at the city's website. The link to that form will be posted on X at Van City Clerk. Also want to note the City of Vancouver's longstanding commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, including utmost respect for all genders. I remind committee members that when addressing speakers and staff, we will avoid using gendered honorifics. And instead, we'll refer to them by first and last name, role, or title. There is one report on today's agenda, as well as a motion to go in camera. I'd like to remind committee members that if amendments are brought forward, they must be submitted to the clerk in final written form before the committee member introduces them. Please ensure that the clerk has received your amendment by emailing it directly to Tina Penny and Cassian Nasrallah. The committee is required to meet in camera later today, and the reason and authority under the Vancouver Charter are listed on the agenda. Would somebody like to move that we go in camera later this morning? Moved by Boyle, seconded by Joe. All those in favor say yay. Opposed say nay. The motion carries unanimously. All right, here we go. Item number 1 and the only item. The next item on the agenda is the 2023 Auditor General Annual Report and 2024 Operational Plan. I will now invite the Auditor General, Mike McDonnell, to introduce and present the item. Mike.
As mentioned, the lone item on today's agenda is my office's 2023 Annual Report and 2024 Operational Plan. The next slide, please. The annual report was released at the end of January in conjunction with my 2024 audit plan. The Auditor General bylaw requires me to produce only an annual report, a record of what my office did last year. A record of past achievement is fine on its own, but I think it's far more meaningful when it's related to what comes next. So to achieve that, this annual report is also the OAG's 3-year operational plan. So you can see in one place how we performed, where we're now, and where we're headed. 2023 represented the first full year of operations for the OAG, where a number of firsts were achieved. Our first audit report, an examination of building permit fees, was released in January and presented to Council at the AGC's meeting on February 2nd. All 5 of the report's recommendations were accepted by the City, and all 5 were endorsed by Council. I also released my first annual report. The document I'm presenting to you today is the second of what will be an annual accountability report. In 2023, I released a total of 5 audit reports containing 33 recommendations. And in December, I released the first follow-up report on the status of previous audit recommendations, the first of what will be a semi-annual publication. Next slide, please. 2023 was the first year my office was fully staffed. It's a rather impressive group with a combined total of over 80 years of audit experience. Every staff member has at least an undergraduate degree in fields ranging from commerce, criminology, history, politics, biology, and general arts. And all but one of the team also has either a graduate degree or a professional designation, and some with both. Graduate degrees at both the master's and doctoral level include business and criminology, education, child and youth care. And the professional designations include Chartered Professional Accountant, we've got 5 of those. Certified Information Systems Auditors, we have 3 of those. There are 2 certified fraud examiners and 2 certified internal auditors. We've also hired 2 new team members to support our whistleblower and investigations work, which I'll speak to in a later slide. Like any leading organization, we monitor our performance through a framework outlining why we're here and what we're trying to accomplish. Ours begins with a mandate drawn verbatim from the Auditor General bylaw to assist Council in holding itself and city administrators accountable for the quality of stewardship over public funds and for achievement of value for money in city operations. Our 4 goals, each with associated key performance indicators, describe how we fulfill our mandate and execute the mission. I'll go through each goal individually. Slide, please. Goal 1, to establish an independent whistleblower function within the office. In June of 2022, so it's 22, Council approved a motion from this committee to assign responsibility for the city's whistleblower function to the Auditor General. Council approved a revised whistleblower policy in October last year. KPI 1.1 was to hire 2 investigators. Must state that targets for this goal were based on the assumption that the revised whistleblower policy, hi Carol, would be in place by mid-year rather than in the last quarter. As a result of that delay, at year-end we were only in the process of hiring. As of today, the hiring process is nearly complete. I do have some news for you on that front. An offer has been made to and accepted by Hamish Flanagan, and he'll start with us on April 2nd. Hamish is a lawyer, called to the bar in his native New Zealand in 2003, and also a certified mediator. He's currently a sector manager with the Office of the Auditor General of New Zealand, responsible for the office's work in foreign affairs, trade, defense, and emergency management. Really a well-qualified individual, to say the least. We're in the final stages of the hiring process for 1 further team member and expect to be making an offer of employment in the next few days. Regarding KPI 1.2, procedures for whistleblowing and complaint intake, processing, investigation, reporting have all been drafted. They'll be finalized as soon as Hamish and the rest of the team are in place. I expect to have this goal completed this year and replace it next year with a new goal and KPIs related to the operation of the whistleblowing function. We'll go to the next slide, please. Thanks. Goal 2 is going to have enduring value to produce high-quality work. As planned this year, I released a total of 6 reports, 5 audit reports and 1 follow-up. I'll talk about the follow-up a little bit more in a later slide. KPI 2.2 speaks to external quality review by my practice regulator, the Chartered Professional Accountants of British Columbia, CPABC. CPABC's first practice inspection was conducted in March. Our work met the practice review's requirements with, quote, no reportable deficiencies identified. That's actually quite high praise, to be clear. This is a very important performance metric to me in all seriousness, as I believe audit quality underpins the credibility of all that we do. So I'm very pleased with the result. CPABC's next practice inspection is scheduled to take place in 3 years in 2026. Just next slide, please. Just to go through the reports that we released, building permit fees came out in January. The audit examined whether the city had implemented processes to accurately and consistently assess building permit fees in compliance with the Vancouver Building Bylaw. We also looked at whether administrative processes were clearly defined, well understood, and appropriately resourced. The report resulted in 5 recommendations to the city. In February, we released our audit of office furniture purchases. The audit examined whether the city's purchases of office furnishings were made with due regard for best value, including examination of the procurement process and processes. Policies and processes. The report contained 5 recommendations. In May, we released our audit on the permitting program cost recovery model. The audit examined whether the city's permitting program cost recovery model was designed and applied to ensure that full costs were actually recovered and projected reserve balances were sufficient to stabilize future operations. We had a total of 8 recommendations coming out of that one. In November, we released our audit of Park Board revenue management. At the request of the Vancouver Board of Parks and Recreation, we undertook an audit of whether the Park Board operated an effective framework to achieve revenue-related objectives for its assets and services that generate revenue. That resulted in a total of 6 recommendations to the Park Board. And in December, we released our audit of the Vancouver Police Department's enterprise risk management. At the request of the Police Board, we undertook an examination of whether the Vancouver Police Department effectively oversaw and managed enterprise risks. The report contained a total of 9 recommendations. The next slide, please. Goal 3 is to provide city departments with objective and helpful recommendations as evidenced by 3 things. The proportion of recommendations accepted by audited departments, the proportion of audit recommendations endorsed by this committee, and the proportion of recommendations actually implemented over 3 years. We aim to have all of our audit recommendations accepted by audited departments. In practice, though this isn't always going to happen, differences of opinion can sometimes occur. That's why I make my presentation here and ask them to follow up with their presentation. But it's what we work towards, and indeed, all 33 of our audit recommendations from last year were accepted by the city. We also aim to have all of our recommendations endorsed by this committee. This should be what happens in practice, and indeed it was what happened last year with all 33 of our recommendations endorsed by you. KPI 3.3, which is the proportion of recommendations fully implemented by audited departments over 3 years, is measured through the semi-annual follow-up process. Our first follow-up, issued in December, reported on the status of the 18 recommendations that had been issued in our first 3 audit reports, so essentially up to mid-year. The city reported having fully or substantially implemented or taken alternative action for 7 out of 18 recommendations, or 39% of the total. This is actually pretty quick. In my experience, it's unlikely that this pace of implementation will be sustained. It would be nice if it was, but only time will tell. Go to the next slide, please. The last goal is for audit work to yield cost savings or enhanced revenues that at least match our operational costs over 5 years. As noted earlier, the city acted quickly to implement or take alternate action on 39% of the recommendations in our first 3 reports. We estimate this should result in financial benefits to the city of $5.7 million in 2023. Compared to the total cost of operating the OAG since inception, so that's all of our startup costs as well, of $3 million, we see a total ROI to the city of 160%. Over 5 years, we estimate a total economic benefit to the city of $56 million from the recommendations we've made so far. Details of this estimate can be found on page 11 of the annual report. Now, while I'm obviously quite pleased with this result and hope you are too, I must caution that my goal for the OAG is to cover its costs, to break even rather than be a profit center. Not all audits will have positive financial implications, and quite frankly, nor should they. The benefits from implementing audit recommendations often relate to improved performance and risk management, and either don't have direct financial benefits or have potential financial benefits that are impossible to estimate with any degree of confidence. Please note that my office is only one of two audit offices in all of Canada at any level of government that estimates the financial benefits of performance audit, the other one being Toronto. It's a challenging exercise, and the projections presented represent estimates based on actions that we don't control. So while I think the information is interesting, it needs to be considered in the context of all the other performance information that's been provided to you. It should also be considered in the context of all the other valuable recommendations provided in our reports, such as improving compliance with the city's building bylaw, streamlining the building permit assessment process, improving compliance with requirements of national and international trade agreements, improving the clarity of the city's procurement tendering documents, ensuring cost recovery fees do just that, fully recover the cost of services now and over the long term, ensuring the sufficiency of reserve balances, establishing a fee-setting process to ensure financial objectives are set and are met for park assets, improving the monitoring of park asset performance, and improving the management and oversight of police department's enterprise risks. All of these recommendations, if fully and properly enacted by the city, will add value to its operations. So that's it from me. Are there any questions?
Councilor Dominato, yeah, okay. I'll just add you. Please go ahead, Councilor Dominato.
Thanks for the update. I'm just, can you remind me what the planning is looking for this year in terms of audits, just the topic areas, if you've got that sort of finalized?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't hear.
Yeah, no, I'm just wondering if you could expand on audit topics for this year.
For the coming year?
I think you covered them in the fall, but I'm just curious if you could give us a refresher on what areas that you're going to be looking at this year in 2024.
So that's, that information's in our 2024 audit plan. And in the upcoming year, we'll be completing our part 2 of our audit with the Vancouver Police Department, performance management. This particular piece is looking at performance measures that they use to gauge their performance. And the information that gets reported to the board as part of that oversight process. We're currently engaged in an audit of not-profit leases. So that's predominantly with the Arts and Culture Department. We expect to have that out, in June, so before mid-year. I'd like to have it out earlier, but we have a little staffing issue on that one. That's pushed us back a little bit. We have begun an audit of cybersecurity. And so that's we'll be talking about that a little bit later today, what that might look like. We're also looking at capital asset management, in particular park board assets. Park board assets, to my mind, represent a very special category of asset that's owned by the city. It's a legacy from previous generations that the current generation is custodians of for the benefit of us and for future generations. And I think it's a really important area for my team to look at. And we're also looking at the city's management of risk, so risk management. It's an area that I don't have actually specific concerns about, but it's an area that I also know is really important. And so I think, this is an area that my office should be looking at. We'll also be issuing 2 follow-up reports. So we'll do our one in June and another one in December. So that's our plan for the upcoming year.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all I had for questions.
Great. Thanks, Councilor Dominato. Sophia.
Mike, so I just want to commend you on the first report. I think it's very interesting. The goals, I guess one question is whether these goals you expect will change over time. This is sort of your first report, but I can see, while some of these goals might be good in the short term, I think over the longer term, some trending would be a better measure. On goal 3.1, though, I guess the question is, and you've already noted it, not all issues will be accepted by audited departments. And I think having a goal at 100%, I'm wondering if that might lead to a bias of not including something. There will be tension and not all audit issues necessarily get accepted, but they are the Auditor General's recommendations. The confirmation is actually the escalation path is to this committee, which is your next goal. So I'm just kind of wondering about the bias potentially in 3.1. So maybe I'll start there. I've got other questions.
That's a fair observation. I'm torn between setting something that I think might actually be achieved over the long term versus what we actually aspire towards. And that is that all of our recommendations will be accepted by the audited departments, that we've done our work and brought them on side with us without having to, as you said, escalate by bringing it here, if you will, asking this committee to break the tie, if you will. So yes, well, I take your point. I think that's what we still want to aim towards. Our work is I think more about collaboration than it is about I gotcha. And if we do that well, then most of the time we should land in the same place working with management. We should, most importantly though, always land in the same place when it comes to this committee and getting your support for the recommendations. we miss that, then I look at that as having more serious consequences.
Yeah. And I think just longer term, I don't know if the departments have a process where they identify their own issues. One of the sort of longer term things I see is, the percentage of sort of what you raise versus what they have raised themselves, and seeing that trend over time is probably a better longer term measure. And then on 3.3, the only other observation is whether that's a reflection on your process or the department's. So whether that was the right measure.
Well, the issue of attribution in 3.3 is a fair one. I like to track it because, while it isn't necessarily 100% reflective of our performance, it does reflect on the value of the recommendations that we've brought forward. And it does highlight whether progress is being made or not in a very public sort of way. I think part of my role is to, shine bright lights in dark corners, and this is certainly one way of doing that. It's an issue that's endemic to being an auditor general, is that you make recommendations, and sometimes those recommendations sit forever. And it wasn't very long ago that I heard one of my colleagues bemoan the fact that there have been recommendations outstanding with the government department that she audits for a decade, and nothing was getting done. And that's unfortunate, because if that recommendation was endorsed by this committee, in essence, it's the audited department saying, well, I don't care what the elected officials say, it's not that important to us. And that is, I think, a basis for having a conversation. So I take your point with respect to how indicative it is of our performance, but it's really relevant to the office adding value.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sophia. Carol, great you could join us.
Yes, thank you. A little delay on the way. Thanks, Mike, for the easy to follow, well laid out, like the report. One of the questions I have, it hits on goal 1 and goal 4, but more generally, which other municipalities would you be looking to benchmark? And when I'd like to dig in a little deeper into goal 4, and you mentioned Toronto, and that was measuring the payback, if you will, the return on the investment for the office. And I can't remember what the other one was, but in general, what are you benchmarking against?
Right now, in terms of this particular goal, the only other office other than us is Toronto. Toronto's
it is
required to
ours.
do so under their enabling legislation, and so they have for a number of years. But there is, to my knowledge, no other, legislative audit office at any level of government, municipal, provincial, or federal, that does this, at least, and releases the information publicly anyway. So benchmarking is a little difficult in the absence of very much data in that space. In terms of other measures, though, the kinds of things that I put in here in terms of the acceptance of recommendations, the actual bringing recommendations to life, being actioned by the audited departments, these are things that are commonly reported by other audit offices, although not universally. And so I could do more benchmarking with respect to that.
Thanks. And I'm assuming, I know the municipal auditors general do get together occasionally and compare notes and, see what other practices are. I did note Toronto had just issued a report, so they've just put out their numbers on whistleblowers. So early days for you, a mature practice in Toronto. So I'm assuming that they would be an office you would be dialoguing with to see how they're doing on the whistleblower. I shouldn't actually, that almost sounded like I was answering the question for you, but if
I did.
you could let me know on the whistleblower area, which offices would you be talking to see, where to take it to going forward? And I'm assuming Toronto would be a good one because they had a good report on how they laid out
Yes.
the results for the year.
So I did actually reach out to Tara Anderson, who's the Auditor General for the City of Toronto, and oddly enough, Tara and I's paths had crossed before. We both worked at the Auditor General of British Columbia at the same time, so I know her personally. And asked for some help with respect to guidance, policies, procedures, that sort of thing as we were trying to get the office up and running. And so she put us in touch with members of her team that we've met with and will continue to work with. I also reached out to my colleague in Ottawa, so the Auditor General of the City of Ottawa, Nathalie Gaujean, and she's been extremely helpful in providing us with context and background to help get that set up. They have a similar function there, although they don't do the same sort of public reporting in that for that particular function.
And sorry, the last part then, just digging a little deeper into Goal 4. I appreciate that not all the work is going to contribute to a direct saving that you can measure. And you know, while I totally get that, it is a fairly common expectation in municipal audit offices, more so than provincial and federal. So, you know, in Toronto, their numbers, you know, it's pretty big, so I'm not going to quote it as to the multiple that they're achieving. It definitely plays into which audits you pick in terms of, you know, you can pick one that it's not going to lead towards savings, and another audit it may. So maybe it's just leaving you with the thought to explore it a little further to see if it could go higher than just covering costs. And I think that would be really something that would be an evolution. You know, you're not going to get it overnight, but at the same time, would you consider trying to up the 100% to something a bit higher?
Consider yes over time, though. And, you know, this is still a very new office, last year being our first full year of operations. I think the fact that we achieved the result that we did in the first year, not only covering our operating costs from last year, which were, you know, about $1.8 million, but also all of the startup costs in the 18 months before that, I thought was pretty darn good, to be honest. Setting a more aggressive number, Toronto, it's 12. That was what the ROI is every dollar spent on the audit office in Toronto, they estimate they get $12 back. Was in their annual report that came out last week. And I accept that that's a lofty goal and perhaps someplace where we might get to over time, but I'm not quite prepared to go there yet. It's just way too early. And I'll be honest with you, Carol, this is a little bit of a scary area for me because there's just not a lot of information out there and not a lot of accepted practice and how to measure this. And we take, I think, a very conservative approach in coming up with these numbers. I don't want to claim victory over ground that we haven't actually covered. And I'm taking this slowly and cautiously. And I think that prudent approach is probably the right route to go. But to answer your question, specifically, yes, I would consider that. But let's see how the next year or two go as we get everything set up.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks, Mike. I'm assuming Councillor 10 is Archie on the list for questions. Oh, how come? Oh, okay. All right.
No, I don't think so, but I'm happy to make a comment, Councillor Fry.
Sure, we'll do comments after this. This is just questions, but sorry, I was confused. Councillor Joe didn't show up as his regular self, so.
Number 10 now. Okay, good.
Councillor Joe, number 10.
Okay, thanks. So thanks, Mike, for the update. It's really impressive to see the outcome here. So a couple of questions about Goal 4. So the 2023 actual is 160% return of investment. I'm still amazed by the business license fees review. It's huge investment, return of investment opportunity there. So I wonder for 2024 target, 100%, because your license fees assessment, that's multiple years, right? So not only for 2023. So that 2024 target is only for the new return for investment, or it's also including the business license, the ongoing business license fees?
So that's a running total.
Okay.
That will encompass 5 years. Once we have 5 years worth of information, right now we've got 1 year's worth. So it will be the cumulative costs over 5 years relative to the cumulative benefits expected to be achieved over 5 years,
Okay, and this 2024 target does not consider the,
one on one.
just one, okay.
So next year would be 2 and 2.
I see. Okay, good. The other questions, to follow up Carol's question regarding the, really the benefit, because some of the report for this year, for instance, cybersecurity, so very important. Perhaps the recommendation will including like more investment instead of cost saving. So in those recommendations, it's so important, so influential, but it may not generate a direct cost saving. So I wonder what is the best, like KPI in terms of,
Well,
yeah,
they might,
okay,
but it's just not something that can be reasonably estimated.
yeah,
So, for instance, we made a recommendation that the city improve its compliance with national and international trade agreements. Could there be an economic benefit to the city? Absolutely. Potentially the costs foregone in litigation that never happened because we were on side with with these agreements as opposed to being offside of them. What's the potential economic benefit of cybersecurity? Well, the cost, the reputational cost potentially to the
huge,
city
yeah.
of a weakness that hadn't been identified and was exploited later on down the road. Certainly there's benefit, but I cannot pin a dollar figure to it in any reasonable sort of way.
Yeah,
So we try not to. And there's always going to be potentially a cost involved in implementing a recommendation. And I accept that, but that's completely out of my control. So that's not an area that we estimate going towards. Yeah, it's just not something that we have or I've seen done anywhere else. So of course, I've only ever seen the cost, the benefit calculated in one other city.
yeah. So my point is really that we all know the huge value of this work. So what is the best way to have some more objective KPI rather than just focusing on the dollar value?
What I've got here is the best ones that I
Mm-hmm.
know of at the moment.
Mm.
I look at the annual reports of my peers to see if there's other emerging practice. There isn't, for instance, agreement amongst Canadian auditors general as to what should be measured and reported publicly.
Mm.
I've been involved in some of those discussions going back to my time with the Auditor General of BC 15 years ago. So it's been a live topic for a long time, and there isn't an agreed set out there. So every office reports on their performance in their own unique way. And so I'm live to that. I look at what others are putting out there and endeavor to draw from what I consider to be best practice.
Okay, that's fair. Thanks, Mike. Mhm. Thanks.
Thanks, Lenny. So I've added myself to the queue for a question, unless Archie, if you had a question, otherwise we do have comments after questions. Archie, did you have a question or?
No, I have more of a comment.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
I'm just going to quickly add myself to the question queue then, and thanks for this, Mike. I'm curious on the follow-up function. Now, per the terms of reference, obviously follow-up is the responsibility of council, but you're doing semi-annual follow-ups as well. How is that working? Do you see room for improving it, like maybe based on how we interpret your findings and respond to them? And should we have a second lens applied to this? Could we improve upon that process moving
Thank you
forward?
very much for that question. I think it's a really important one. So yes, as you pointed out, the responsibility to follow up on the status of recommendations is part of the terms of reference of this committee. And you asked me to undertake that on your behest. So we've been doing that. The self-assessment model is only works if this committee and its members read those self-assessments with a critical eye and ask questions. Not questions really to be asked of me, but questions to be asked of the audited departments to satisfy yourselves that what you are reading makes sense and you're prepared to accept it. If you have doubts, if you have questions, if you want further information or if you want some validation of some of the information that's there, well, then it's really incumbent on the committee to ask for it. If you want validation, my team can do that. You want further information from the audited organization, department, then they can provide that. But really the onus rests with the members of this committee to ask those questions and read that report with a critical eye.
So in a follow-up on the follow-up, in the theoretical sense, would that be a function perhaps of this committee to invite those audited departments to come back in a year or what have you and report back on how they are implementing it in a very specific and thoughtful kind of response to the audit?
Well, of course, that is part of the follow-up process because they're self-assessment. They write it themselves. So they will be doing that until such time as a recommendation has been fully acted upon or they've taken acceptable alternative actions, in which case it drops off the list from there on in. So they will be doing that. But I think what I'm suggesting is that if you want more information than that which has been provided, if you want to probe a little deeper into some of the representations that are in there, that's the time to do it while they're here, and maybe ask them to either provide it to you after the meeting or come back at the next meeting in 6 months' time and talk about it. But that's really up to you.
Right. Perhaps that can be a discussion amongst our committee later as a functional thing. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate the presentation. Seeing no further questions, would somebody like to move the motion? Moved by Dominato, seconded by Joe. Is there any discussion? And I know Archie had some comments.
Yes, Councillor Bride, I just wanted to sort of compliment the Auditor General. I thought he did a very good job in terms of reporting out and was very thoughtful in terms of preparing his both his objectives and also the assessment. I also agree with the comments around goal 4. I think that it is very challenging to be assessing the outcome, measuring in an objective way, and there's a lot of subjectivity. And having read some of the other Auditor Generals that report their reports in terms of reporting out their results, some of the results are may involve things that are difficult to sort of verify. So I think taking a cautious approach as Mike is doing, I think is admirable, and I think it'll be good to watch as his department matures and reports out on some more challenging issues.
Thanks, Archie. Seeing no further discussion on the queue, this is a receipt for information item, so would somebody like to move the motion? Sorry. So we'll just vote on it, sorry. All in favor? Do we need to do it on the voting queue, or can we just verbally? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none. That motion passes unanimously, and this concludes the agenda. May we have a motion to adjourn? By Dominato, seconded by Montague. All those in favor say yay. All those opposed say nay. The motion carries unanimously, and this meeting is adjourned. We will now transition out of the chamber and into the Cascadia room for the in-camera portion of our meeting. Archie, somebody will connect with you to facilitate that. You're going to have to log out and log back in. Okay, so say 5 minutes to in-camera.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.